family come from the south of Russia in the Caucasus, where what is known as the Pontic Hellenes, or the Ionians that have lived in the Black Sea area for around 3,500 years. And an integral part of our identity and understanding of ourselves and life, we have a saying dance is the longevity of life. Everybody sings, everybody dances, and everybody shares toasts and poetry. They're kind of like a bard, they're storytellers. So that's probably the foundation of where I learned, because I watched my dad get up and move very, very automatically and spontaneously. And I grew up with live musicians around me, and we celebrated life. My father did pretty much every day at the end of the hard day's work. And there were weekly gatherings where people of my cultural background would get together, play music. Everyone got up, sang, they danced, and they shared these stories. So that inspired me to learn cultural dances initially from quite a young age. Probably 4 or 5 years of age we all got involved, but I went to school to learn how to do these cultural dances from probably about 7 or 8 years of age. And then by the time I was 12, I got into a character ballet company, and I started learning how to perform. First dancers from the Soviet Union, because I joined that company at the age of 12. I also learned classical dance. At that time, the classical form that we were learning, some of it was Russian and some of it was from the Royal Academy of Dance. So it was it felt a bit straitjacket-like by comparison. But fundamentally, I was a dancer and performing artist who sang, and I played instruments. When I was very young, I started off with guitar, and then I moved into learning a bit of piano. And later on in life, I just focused on developing specific percussive styles of different cultural backgrounds. And so as a performing artist, I've been dancing since I was a child, and I've been performing extensively well into my 20s and 30s. And I started to focus predominantly on classical dance, the Russian classical form, from what's called the Mariinsky school. And then I learned with Misha Slavensky, who was basically from the Bolshoi tradition, and I worked with him extensively to study the Vaganova method of classical dance. Where the classical dance was concerned, I studied with different teachers. One was a principal dancer at the Paris Opera. His name was Boris Mrochna. He was Polish. And I learned bar à terre, so the Beryosov method as well from him, which is basically working from the floor and developing core muscles and movement. Then I worked with a guy called Tauno Letonen, who was a principal dancer from the National Ballet of Finland, and he trained at the Bolshoi. So I studied with him for around 2.5, 3 years. With Boris, I was studying for also 3 years. And then I had met Misha Slavensky when I was 22 years of age, and that's when I had a whole download of the Mariinsky tradition, as well as learning the Vaganova method, and became a Vaganova teacher, and later found myself studying with people like Kalina Bugoeva, who was the head of the Sofia Ballet in Bulgaria. She was also a pedagogue. Done workshops with many of these great teachers and some dancers. Boris Akimov was another chap that I had learnt from. Dina Bjorn, who's at the time, principal dancer of the Royal Danish Ballet. So it's a different system. Fundamentally, there are 4 main systems: the Italian system, the Cecchetti; the French system, which is the Paris Opera traditional system; the Royal Danish system, founded on the works of August Bournonville, and then the Russian system, which is basically a fusion of those 3 with the addition of soul and spirituality. So it's sort of a very amazing evolution. Marius Petipa was the great choreographer who went to work on these great ballets like Swan Lake and Sleeping Beauty. I studied all of these systems extensively, and it was my absolute passion. I would live, eat, sleep, drink ballet, and it was something that I really wanted to integrate, because the greatest influence for me was Václav Nijinsky. I was 15 when I saw a photo of him, and I thought, wow, this guy is no ordinary being. it looks to me like he goes into an altered state, channels the archetype of the character he's playing, and just becomes that character. And when I started reading about the works of Nijinsky, because he also choreographed the roles that he played and the anecdotes that many other dancers had written about him, it was clear that they were seeing someone who literally could just shift, go into a trance state and shift from his normal persona and become the character that he was playing. And I thought, yes, this is what I want to be like. I want to approach the dance in this way. And this is apart from his great technical skills as well. So I was very fortunate to meet these teachers and actually many more. I worked with the Sydney Dance Company, Graham Murphy, who's a very well-known international choreographer and a wonderful human being, and had the guidance of many other teachers, including Madame Messera, whose brother Asaf Messera was one of the great teachers and pedagogues of the Bolshoi. I can't remember how many, but there were many of them. I worked at the Royal Ballet for a short period of time. It's only about a 6-month period, including the Rambert over the years from the 80s, under the guidance of and the directorship of Ross McKim. I also worked at the Dutch National Ballet for a period of 3 years. I worked with Maurice Béjart for 2 years, working with the dancers and choreographers. I had worked at the Köln Ballet, the Stuttgart Ballet, the Deutsche Oper, Komische Oper, Staatsoper in Berlin. And then I was also working at various other companies in different countries, and I visited as a visiting teacher and or researcher. So the Germans call me a dance theatre researcher. And so I spent many years learning and receiving input. I was at the Hungarian National Ballet for a period of 5 months, learning and how to be a pedagogue and working with resident choreographers and visiting choreographers and dancers. So over the years, my career spanned from my youth all the way into my mid-30s before I started looking at developing Unstructured Light, which was a theatre group. So, bringing my experience in and from the movement arts, I began to see there was a big gap in the theatre arts because people, especially in the dance world, were simply told what to do, and they were following whatever they were guided to do, especially in the theatre world, the dance theatre world, because you've got ballet, you've got contemporary dance, you've got dance theatre, and you've got other forms of performing arts. And there was a lot of experimentation going on, but I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to teach people who are from various different theatrical backgrounds and performing arts backgrounds to collaborate and work in different ways? So the foundation of Unstructured Light was, what is the meeting point between song, poetry, music, dance, and drama? So by training the performing artists in meditation, group dynamics work, and teaching them basically how to go into an altered state and channel, I pushed them past their limits, and I had dancers learning to sing, singers learning to act, actors learning to dance, musicians learning how to be poets, and so forth. And we started to develop a very interesting theatre group. The whole purpose of it, and I called it metaphysical theatre, was to learn how to go into an altered state and channel archetypes, because all theatre fundamentally is based on channeling the archetype of the character you're playing. Now, my great inspiration was also classical Greek theatre, because that was called the Thespian tradition, where we learned how to go into an altered state, channel the archetype of the character we're playing as a protagonist. We had the orchestra, not in the same way as we have musical orchestras with the musicians playing in a pit, but rather we had what was called a chorus coming on. So we had music, we had the chorus, we had poetry being read through an orator, we had the dance happening, and we had the actor and the dynamism of the drama. And all of this was a part of ancient Greek theatre. So that was an inspiration for me to say, well, how can we reproduce that by having, instead of separate categories where dancers come on separately, actors come and do their thing, musicians come on separately, we all actually create this quantumly entangled, interactive what I saw as a mosaic that was unfolding before our very eyes. The whole thing was based on the principle of interconnectivity and using the theatre as the stage, as it were, for channeling information and passing that out onto and through to the audience. So it was a very powerful experiential process. It wasn't about entertainment or education. It was about engaging in this direct channeling and sharing of information on multiple layers, offering an experience for the audience that helped to open their minds and their hearts and go into possibly an altered state of consciousness, but definitely receive something that took them into other worlds. So it was a very different way of approaching theatre. Unstructured light could be seen as definitely a meeting point of the principles of consciousness development, self-development, and sharing in a communal context, and acting as what I see as an interface. It's not just the meeting point within oneself, but the players act as intermediaries between wherever it is that they are performing at that point in time and other levels of awareness and consciousness. Now, one might say, okay, that's all relative to your opinion and where you are in yourself, etc. But I knew that I had many experiences in other parts of the world where this did take place. And in fact, first and foremost, I'll explain that in Indonesia, during the Kecak performances, where these participants, including the dancers, the singers, the actors and the musicians, are all integrated and working in a sacred site. And the key point about all this is doing performances at sacred sites, because all these ancient Greek theatres, like the Herodian in Athens, etc., are built on sacred sites, which then take the form of an amphitheatre. So the site itself plays a significant role in terms of the strength of the performance that's delivered. In other words, one is not putting a show on. They're going into an altered state and enabling a process to take place that is received by those who are present as a part of an integrated exchange where this whole happening takes place, and it elevates us into another level or plane of awareness, and what I experience as an extraordinary happening that helps for shifts to take place. So that is one thing that I felt was very important, and Unstructured Light probably does represent the peak integration of a lot of the principles of the systems, especially where the concepts, the ideas of self-development and meditation, getting to know oneself and becoming a channel and creating a space that to some extent can also be quite transformative and in some cases healing as well. Archetypes have been used for millennia to help us understand ourselves and the different aspects of our existence. So we can start with simple archetypes, which means hero and fighter and sometimes the villain, etc. And they're used as part of a storyline for drama, etc. Then we look into the elements of the inner masculine and the feminine. Now, Sophocles did this exceptionally well with Oedipus Rex. Kill the father, marry the mother, that's the inner mother and father that we're talking about. This is very, very important. So those principles were taught through theatre, rather than having to study psychology or go to a school. This is what I found fascinating about the ancient times, and we've lost, I won't even say a lot of that, I'd say most of that, where the theatre is concerned today, to a large extent. Then we look at the virtues, Plato's archetypes, such as goodness and wholeness and truth and justice. These archetypes are very important. They're brought in as themes at the foundation of a plot or the storyline within drama. And then finally, the highest level of archetypes of understanding ourselves, the main emotions of fear, anger, sadness and joy, and how they become the foundation of comedy, tragedy, drama. Then there's melodrama and satire. Now, these are all very significant in terms of understanding the different aspects of ourselves, our personality, character, and then developing into a more whole and balanced self. And then we can say that the ultimate, the peak of all of this, is understanding the elements, the earth, water, fire element, and air and space, and how they integrate with those fundamental emotions to help us to achieve a better sense of understanding our essential selves. For example, earth represents, or the qualities of the earth element. Earth and water are more yin, fire and air are more yang. And so earth represents foundation, structure, identity, stability, nurturing. So all those aspects of ourselves we start to explore through the earth element, and we can create a character around that in terms of the theatre. So yes, this is a very, very holistic approach to understanding ourselves, our daily life activities, communities, and our interaction with life itself. My plans for the future where Unstructured Light are concerned is to utilize all of the different training methodologies, the self-development methodologies, to act as a bridge for performing artists to learn how to understand themselves and have a deeper purpose and meaning in life. I know one thing, that many performing artists are always pushing the envelope, trying to find, challenging themselves to find deeper meaning by working with different directors and producers, etc. But I believe we can create a system that helps them to explore that directly within their own idiom, rather than having to go out and explore things that are beyond what they think their limits are. Look at the actual art that you have already committed to and spent so many years in studying, and study it from this more holistic approach to help you to understand a deeper meaning and purpose based on natural law and I would call them universal principles of the universe.